Welcome to WebRTC Live. In WebRTC Live, we cover the latest technical topics and business use cases for WebRTC and live video. As always, this episode is brought to you by WebRTC.Ventures, leading integrators of WebRTC video into your custom application.
Welcome back to WebRTC Live. I'm your host, Arin, CEO and founder at WebRTC.Ventures. We're a custom design and development agency focused on building live video applications, here to help you take your application live. You can learn more about us at WebRTC.Ventures. In today's episode, we have, as an announced guest, Varun Singh, the founder of CallStats, and also a special guest, Kwindla Kramer, co-founder of Daily. I'm very pleased to be joined by both of you. I know you have some interesting news to share today, as well as some interesting insights. So let's jump right into it. Thanks so much for joining us. Go ahead, Varun.
Thank you, Arin. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a year since I was last here. And last year, I talked about how the pandemic was changing the way we consume audio and video. And exactly almost 13 months later, I'm happy to announce that I'm now at Daily. I just joined them recently. So super excited to be here. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to talk about the future of WebRTC in this talk. And I thought it would be great to get Quinn and his insights on this in this talk. So welcome. I'm really excited to be here. Quinn, welcome. I'm glad that you were able to join us. It's been a hectic morning, you can see. So tell us a bit about yourself and the journey of Daily. I think we'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having me this morning. Morning for me. I'm in California. It's been a pleasure to watch these over the years, and really fun to be here. And it is big news for us at Daily that Varun has joined us. I've known Varun for a long time and had the pleasure of collaborating with him on various things, like lots of people in the WebRTC community. And it's personally, it's a dream for me to get to work with Varun. I mean, we started Daily as a bet on video and audio in general being a bigger and bigger part of everything we do online and with all our devices, and as a bet on WebRTC in particular as the kind of ecosystem around which these big, interesting, technical, social, business changes cohere. So we're relatively early to WebRTC, although there are definitely people who are earlier than us. We started Daily kind of right at the end of 2015 after a couple of years of sort of prototyping and hacking on WebRTC stuff around the edges. And I'm an engineer. I just really have always liked working on large-scale network systems and real-time things, and video in particular. So we did a bunch of stuff over the years from 2016 to now, building various components of a WebRTC stack. Our goal was always just to build a great technology stack, and ultimately to be able to open up pieces of that stack to be used for all the sort of broad range of interesting use cases that we thought would be coming along, including things that are impossible to predict. It's really fun to build tools for other engineers. I know we all kind of have that in our blood. And the most fun thing is sort of building tools and then seeing what people do with them that kind of exceed or kind of completely confound even your expectations. And so we're just continuing to do that. We feel like there's a through line from hacking on the very earliest components of WebRTC that were, folded into Chrome, to now when there's so much more you can do and so much more maturity in the ecosystem, but it still just feels like really early days in terms of all the amazing stuff we see our partners and customers and friends doing.
So Quinn, just following up on that, you'd mentioned a bunch about seeing the world change in the last 2 years, or especially the last 18 months. And historically, we've seen you since 2016. So, you've been around for a while and you built stuff. So, let's talk a little bit about how you see the world's change in the last 18, 24 months. Specifically, I would say the last 12 months really have accelerated a lot. So if you can touch base on what you've seen, it'd be great.
So I think we saw a steady evolution of people's interest in live video and audio, or real-time video and audio conversations and collaboration And we had this image in our minds of where we thought the future was going to go and kind of the slope of that curve. The last 18 months or so have just kind of pulled all that stuff forward. In our world, things didn't really change; they just massively accelerated. And from a business perspective, things that were monetizable, if you're trying to kind of build step by step, revenues and team and technology all together, kind of building a company that you think can last a long time, figuring out what people are willing to pay for at scale at various moments in technology evolution is really important. So we had focused early on things like one-on-one video experiences for telehealth and education and customer support, because those were the use cases people were willing to pay for. And we would regularly get inquiries about how to do, say, 5,000 person online classes, but those were not really monetizable inquiries, in 2015, 2016, 2017, partly for technology reasons, but also just for patterns of usage and social expectations and comfort level of users. So what's happened for us over the last 18 months has been a real acceleration of kind of the need for, the interest in, and the kind of comfort level with jumping into live, real-time, collaborative experiences on your computer and phone.
In talking a little bit about what specifically have you seen in terms of use cases or industries or specific modularities of usage?
We talk a lot internally about building great plumbing that serves a lot of use cases. We think that that's sort of our job. That's our role in the ecosystem, is to build this really terrific kind of foundation. And there's a lot of commonality of the technical pieces that are needed to serve like a really wide range of, from a user perspective, not always common use cases. And so the interesting thing to us has just been sort of how broad the growth of use cases has been. And you put a really nice slide together here. So we've got the kind of evolution of the one-on-one experiences that were kind of the first things you could build a business around. So lots of customer support, lots of tutoring and teaching and professional networking, lots and lots of telehealth for obvious reasons. Some things like dating apps that it was always obvious that they were going to have audio and video, but it took a while for kind of that to stick. And then on top of that stuff, we started to see pretty early in the pandemic era, huge amount of interesting experimentation in future of work. So productivity, collaboration, across a bunch of different kinds of professional work environments, and a huge range of things people thought might be interesting directions. So we have customers who are doing fairly traditional looking video calls, who are doing a kind of native embedded desktop low friction version of video calls. And then customers are doing things like social environments mapped onto office spaces. So wandering around as avatars, and then all kinds of collaborative tools are just kind of available to you in this virtual world. And I mean, we think all of those things are interesting. And again, we think it's the same kind of plumbing that supports all of them. But the real innovation on top of that plumbing happens at the user experience level and at the level of integration with actual work. And then right behind future of work, productivity stuff, we started to see events blossoming. And again, it was like a huge range of different kinds of events that people were trying to bring online quickly in the pandemic era. So ranging from like live music concerts through to professional events that could replace in-person conference experiences. And I think it was in the event space that a bunch of stuff snapped into focus for us around how this stuff was getting pulled forward. So all the events folks who we started working with were doing really, really interesting things. And initially, the motivation was sort of replacing physical real world events that just weren't possible anymore. But very quickly, as people started building out their platforms, they were doing things you couldn't do in the physical world. And the events started to feel like they were augmenting rather than replacing physical conferences. Like we all are excited to go back to at least our favorite physical events. And that's not going to go away, that desire to kind of meet in person or go hear live music in person, or go to a comedy club. But I can't go hear live music every night, I have a kid and a startup, but I could potentially like stream live music in a new social real time, like really immersive feeling way every night. So it opens up the space. These tools open up the space, and the sort of the really interesting work that people are doing, kind of experimenting in these spaces, kind of opens up and augments the things that people started out kind of scrambling to replace. And that the event space kind of segued into more social stuff in general. So we see like a huge amount of experimentation in social gaming with live communication channels of new kinds. Live commerce is really interesting. The future is going to look like some mashup of QVC and eBay, or maybe it's Instagram and Twitter, and I mean, I don't even know what the mashup is going to be, but there's so much fun stuff happening in live commerce. And then new media things like Clubhouse are really kind of pushing on the boundaries of what like talk radio is or will be in the future.
And it's like this is really interesting and exciting because like all these were experimented like maybe 8 or 10 years ago, and for some reason failed. Chat roulette like did try to do dating in some form, much like what Tinder does, right? Like except it's not synchronous, it's asynchronous. And this tension between synchronous and asynchronous keeps like every 5 years we find a new balance between synchronous and asynchronous. So I find that really interesting, and how the last 18 months has kind of pushed us through their 5-year cycle very quickly.
Yeah, nothing is new and everything is new, right? And it's like one
Right.
of these traps and also wonderful things about trying to build new technology is you have so many markers that people have put down in the past that you can build on. You also just have to have the stars align for things to take off and get to critical mass. If you live in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, at some point you get good at pitching investors, and you definitely see this pattern with professional technology investors where they are very aware that like everything has been tried before. How do they identify sort of the moments when the things that have been tried before actually aren't the same thing as was tried before, because the context
Exactly.
is different and the moment is different. The building blocks are different. The enabling pieces around those things are different.
Yeah,
You
and
said something about events. So I want to come back to it. That was interesting. And I think as kind of as the pandemic hit, a lot of the initial adoption of live video was just trying to find any replacement to things that people had resisted going remote with before, education or events or concerts or whatever, right? And so they were really just duplicating as best as they could, sort of duplicating the experience by streaming it, right? And you mentioned really like augmenting those events for the remote attendees, and I think that's really interesting because I feel like now 13, 15, 18 months, sometimes feels like 20 years later, however long we've been in this pandemic, right? We're seeing some shift, right? So like there are some people going back to work, but definitely not everybody is going to. And so that will affect how we do remote work meetings. And I think events are a similar thing, right? We're not going to go back to all in person, certainly. So the best events are always going to have this mix of in person and remote. And I wonder, it's almost like who becomes a first-class citizen in that scenario that you're describing, the person who's in person at the event and is having that, opportunity still to network in person the way we used to, or the person who's remote and maybe is getting some augmented, features and functionality that can't exist easily for the in-person attendee. So I'm curious, if you what you've kind of seen in that shift, or how you kind of work back in both directions. How do you bring some of the coolness of the remote experience back to that person who is in person also?
It's such a great question, and it cuts across so many of these transitions that are happening, where we're building these new tools that are complementary to and different from, but overlapping with things we did a different way just a year and a half ago. The analogy that has been sort of personally useful for me is thinking about watching sports. It's really fun to go to a basketball game live in the stadium. You see a lot more, unless you have courtside seats, you see a lot more of the game if you stay home and watch it on TV. So it's sort of like, which thing are you optimizing for? And I think, I mean, this may not pan out exactly. Maybe it's a little bit of a hot take, but I think that for a lot of professional things, the most valuable version of the experience will be the digital version, the online version.
Mhm.
The social components, though, in person are another whole experience. And you can kind of choose which thing you're optimizing for in each case. And there are personality differences, there are like job differences, there are industry differences. You know, salespeople are always going to want to hang out in person because they're really great at hanging out in person. Some of us are a little more, inner facing, and like we may do a lot of our interactions online, and both kind of groups will get, the equivalent value out of their preferred mode of interaction.
Just to chime in there, like I think a lot of things when you go to an event are not actually going to the talks. They're about other things that happen analogous to that event. So there may be side events. They may be meeting up with the crew that you met last year at the same event. So it's like this thing. It's a bonding experience, and a lot of I can say, like, depends on what you're trying to do. There are lots of deals made in that format. Like you can raise money, you can like close a deal, you can close $1 million deal, you can get new contacts, you can get the word out. And like events had this dual purpose, and they're the hardest thing, because like if you like what we've really missed in the last year, then that's what's actually changed a lot for us, is that we've been able to close deals without being in person, or like meeting VCs, closing $1 million deal without actually having that physical context of meeting. So it's an interesting world, because like it's really pushed us on like some of the primitives that we had ingrained in us, like, you can't do this until you are physically present somewhere. That's kind of changed for us.
I mean, we're a completely distributed team, so we spend a lot of time thinking about how to have a great kind of work environment and the social components that are important for working well with people when we don't ever meet in person. And just because of the timing of like our last couple of years of growth, most of us have never met in person. And I think the default would have been that, once a quarter or twice a year, once a year, we all would have met somewhere in the world, as many of us as could possibly have, and met in person. And I actually think it's been really useful not to be able to do that, to force us to both work really hard online to kind of substitute or work around that at least default assumption, and also to question that assumption. Like, do we really need to meet in person to have the kind of feeling of personal connectivity that leads to being really happy, working really well together? I think it's still an open question. I think a bunch of people on our team would love to have a big in-person event. And I know from talking to folks that there are other people who kind of don't really feel like they personally need it, but totally respect if other people do. So there are some like just personality differences in how we choose to interact.
Yeah, absolutely. For our live viewers, if you have any questions, feel free to just type them into the public chat. One question for Varun or Quinn here. Mahendra asks, how can we record live video chat automatically on the server? So maybe if you can just kind of quickly address how that works sort of in WebRTC in general, or for Daily specifically.
Quinn, do you want to take that?
Sure, but feel free to chime in.
Sure.
Yeah, so in WebRTC in general, you're moving these video and audio streams around in at least a couple of different possible ways. You can have peer-to-peer connections. You can also route your connections through a media server. The question is, how do you record on the server? The basic answer is you pull the live stream data from the server into a format that makes sense to save on disk for later transcoding or replaying. We do that at Daily in a few different ways, evolved based on customer pull. But the two kind of big options there, we support both of them. I think a lot of platforms support both of them. Is you can save the individual tracks. So you can save like just my mic, and then just my camera, just Varun's mic, just Varun's camera, because you go enumerate all the tracks and save whichever ones you want in as close to the format that they arrive on the server as possible, which is really valuable for reusing them totally flexibly later. Like if you want to edit together a professional cut of an event. The other way you save things is to take whichever of the tracks you care about and you mix them and composite them together into a single video and audio stream that you save. And that's really convenient because you don't have to do anything else to reuse it later, but then it's a fixed artifact that was kind of laid down in that format. That design was finished right then. The moment you save those bytes to disk. One of the things we're trying to do with our APIs is kind of give our customers more flexibility about what those audio and video composites look like. So we're really excited about a bunch of work around recording and live streaming flexibility, controlling layouts, adding text really flexibly, flying emojis, which a lot of our customers reference when they ask us for these features. And I think you're going to see from us and from a whole lot of people building interesting WebRTC stuff over the next year, a whole lot of attention being paid to how we can support like content creation that comes out of all the various kind of WebRTC lower level plumbing pieces that we've all built. It's like a huge amount of value there for the events platforms, for live commerce, for social and gaming platforms, for people doing things like fitness classes. So it's a great question and something that like there's a lot of really interesting and fun stuff getting done right now in our world related to.
And I'm actually quite excited about the creator tools specifically because like if you think about recording and even the recording that we're doing right now, we could have like overlays on our like in our tiles, which would just say like our names and like more professional, like as if we were on television on a newscast, for example. You would have the logos, we would have like a bunch of things. You could swap in and swap out people depending on who's playing. And I think those kind of creator tools, which could be dynamically written, like and composited, those are exciting ways to think about like how the future would look like. Not necessarily like just recording the streams and dumping them somewhere.
It's such a great example too of the nothing's new, but you can always, kind of come back to stuff when you have more of the pieces together. One of the engineers on our team who works on this stuff has built these kind of video production tools through several eras of technology, going back to, the professional versions of these tools that are used by broadcast television producers through various iterations of things you could do in kind of the semi-professional world. And now what I think one way to think about what a lot of us are super excited about with these content tools is how do we completely democratize access to these great kind of really awesome content tools.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area too. I mean, earlier this week, I had a chance to kind of see a more traditional AV setup in a live event broadcasting scenario with, black magic boxes and cables all around, right? And certainly for certain types of productions, you're still going to have that same sort of hardware, regardless of how you're streaming it. But for your typical, YouTube creator, I think there is still a lot of room and a lot of room for creativity in how programs like this are put together and how content is put together for that. For me, that's an interesting segue to something I want to get both of your take on too, because I think, Varun, you've got a nice list of different use cases here and things that we could use WebRTC for. I always am thinking about which of those use cases are the ones that are going to become commoditized, which are the ones where we don't need any more innovation and where, even if it's not a very good solution, sort of the most popular solution wins, right? And then what are the situations where there's still a lot of room for those of us in the development space, whether you're sort of the plumbing providers like Daily or like at WebRTC.Ventures and building the applications around that, or any entrepreneurs who may be watching this and thinking about the products they're building. Where do you see in some of those use cases? Maybe tell me a little bit about which ones you see have maybe more risk of commoditization or portions of it, and those where there's a ton of room still for really creative applications. And I think that's where a lot of the interesting part of what is the future of WebRTC comes from is specific use cases.
The challenge with history and like redoing things is that you're always wrong, right? So like, for example, when Zoom came around, it was already like you had the big players like Skype uh, and others, and
WebEx.
Hangout. Yeah, well, yeah, you have exactly WebEx, and then like the people at WebEx came back and built Zoom, and Zoom became like the heartthrob of the pandemic, right? Like really initially, like when we did not have anyone do anything else, everyone was using Zoom, side loading something, right? There were classes on Zoom because they were side loading Zoom with screen sharing in some form, and and I think like the and Clubhouse like is a very good example of like completely taking the world by surprise, because people needed that outlet, people had a lot of time, uh, did not know what to do with it, everyone had opinions, the world was fragmented, like everyone had opinions, Twitter was not good enough medium to do that, and Clubhouse emerged as a space. So like to me it feels like the forefront are entrepreneurs who are trying to push the boundary all the time, like re-exploring the explored era, because like the tools have changed. Like 10 years ago it was really, or 15 years ago, it was impossible to run like a cloud service because you just do not have cloud services. The only thing, AWS came and S3 came with it, so you could like do downloadable content, but you could not do real time. But now today you have Subspace, you have turn server providers, you have like so many things that can get you connectivity. You can run your own media servers, you could use daily. So a lot of the Lego blocks exist, and now you can either build those tiny Lego blocks and build something small and interesting, or you could take some bigger Lego blocks and build something more exciting. And all of those options exist, like a combination of that. That's how I see it.
So you see that full range of Lego blocks still existing in the future, because I think that's an interesting aspect too of where development is going, because I think we have somewhat, I'll say competing, though they don't necessarily have to be competing with each other, but sort of alternate paths, trends happening, right? And, on the one hand, you have CPASs who are trying to provide more and more sample projects that you can build on. Others, and correct me if I phrase this wrong, but like daily kind of wanting to provide a little higher level API as well above that. And then sort of the other extreme of people who are unbundling WebRTC altogether and looking at doing, WebAssembly and manipulating the media pipeline and web codecs themselves. So you've kind of got, pretty wildly divergent paths there. Kind of where do you see yourselves, and where do you see the evolution of those blocks? Do they all stick around, or depends on the use case?
I think they won't all stick around. There's definitely going to be some competitive winnowing over time, but the broader context, which I think is much more the way we think about things strategically, is that at every layer we're just so early. The markets are going to be so big. Like we can't even quite imagine. Even those of us who are super optimistic about this, I think, are probably undercounting how big the opportunities are. I mean, if you look at that slide that Varun made, the left column, like every one of those applications is going to have real-time live features. Oh, sorry, the one with the very specific use cases. Yeah, like every one of these spaces is just going to be so big. There are more and more work, play, communication, social dimension stuff is happening online. Like in the US now, there's more video watched on YouTube than any kind of traditional video, and we're just going to see that whole evolution happen in all of these things. So, I mean, I remember in 2015 when the smartest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley all thought social media was done. Like that was a fixed, settled market. There weren't going to be any more good investments in there, and TikTok is going to be bigger than Facebook at some point. And I think there's a whole new crop of really interesting consumer social apps like Dispo. I mean, I have no idea whether Dispo is going to be big or not, but I know that team is really good and is doing really interesting things. And we just see that sort of same thing happening across the board at the customer facing or the user facing level. And then at the level of the building blocks to serve all of those like really, really massive opportunities, there are going to be a bunch of kind of different approaches people take. We've bet on kind of WebRTC as a core, really flexible component of that future, that you can have a bunch of those building blocks kind of made on top of in various ways. But they're going to be, as you say, non-WebRTC building blocks that are really important components here too. And, the secret of WebRTC is that all of us make a whole lot of use of like HTTP kind of REST APIs somewhere in our system as well. So everything gets built in kind of layers on top of all the older stuff. Our bet is like just the way we think about our company. The goal is to serve the broadest possible range of developers for the broadest possible set of use cases that make sense. Like, we're not trying to compete with what we in our internal discussions think a little bit of legacy CPaaS, vendors that were built to solve a set of problems that were like the hardest problems to solve 6-8 years ago. We think we're solving a new hard set of problems, and that sort of slices the market and the technology building blocks up in there's a slightly new, more optimal way to slice, the building blocks for some of those new hard problems.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, I like your perspective there, Quinn, that, we're still so early in so many of these markets. I mean, it's a good reminder, because I know I'll fall into that trap sometimes of thinking, well, we've turned a certain corner in remote work and the pandemic, even though knowing that we're not at the end of any of that yet, but we've turned a certain corner, but that doesn't mean we really have that much insight into what things are going to look like 5 or 10 years from now, because it is changing so rapidly. So yeah, always room for a better mousetrap, for sure.
I mean, so much room. And the fun thing is you have to choose from a prioritization in your own engineering work perspective, or which customers, you kind of focus your efforts on. But you don't really have to choose in terms of being optimistic about all the technologies. I mean, we do a lot of WebRTC stuff and a little bit of HLS stuff, for example. And we think both of those kind of standards are incredibly important, and lots of our customers are going to completely mix and match. And so we just want to be good at the things we're really good at, and good enough at the things that, kind of are adjacent to all the things we think we're really good at, and help our customers kind of make the best possible mix and match choices.
And this question that you asked is also something that the WebRTC community initially tried to answer 10 years ago when they came up with the API. There was the low level, high level, my hands are wrong, but high level, low level API discussions. And we picked what we considered at that time a higher level API construct. And there's a big push to deconstruct that into smaller APIs, and that will happen. And nonetheless, there's now a move to have the whole gamut of APIs, right? You have the pre-built where you can pick something. You want to build something like Zoom, your experience is like Zoom. You want to take the Zoom experience, and instead of side loading Zoom, you want to have a more controlled relationship with your audio and video. You can just use the pre-built to do that. Then you have things where we have component layouts where you can use reactified code to place your video as opposed to using an iframe. And then you could use the low level APIs, and at some point we will go down that path of web codecs and such, because if you want to do what Clubhouse did, right? They want to have this HSTS head tracking audio, spatial audio. There is no way today you could do that without actually ripping apart the pipeline a little bit and inserting something in the middle to make that happen. So depending on how the world moves, sometimes it's because of security, sometimes it's about spatial audio, sometimes it's about bandwidth conservation, finding the right way to scale it to 1 billion people to watch something like the inauguration, which will be in 2-3 years from now. There'll be a new inauguration, and some if the pandemic is still raging, it may, or if there's a new pandemic, we will have to find a way to broadcast that.
So what are we talking about now that you think in 5 years you'll look back on and say, I'm really glad we don't have to discuss that anymore? And what are we too focused on perhaps now?
one pain point we see over and over is trying to explain to our customers sort of what those building blocks are from the perspective of people who've been working on video for 20 years. And, like, well, if you want 20 seconds of latency, do this. If you want 10 seconds of latency, do this. If you want, 200 milliseconds of latency, do this. So one of the things we've been trying to get really good at, both in our actual kind of conversations with today's customers and also in how we're planning for the API evolution and the building blocks evolution that make up our product line, is trying to make that never something customers have to think about at all. Like aspirationally, if you want to have a one-on-one call and you want to have 100,000 person broadcast, you should be able to just worry about your user experience there, and our APIs should just do the right thing. And
so I would just flip a switch perhaps to take our chat and start streaming it live, and I don't have to think anything else about it.
That's right. You don't have to figure out, okay, I need these two different tools and I need to build a bridge between them. Even at the API level, we shouldn't make you choose necessarily, large call or small call. I mean, a long time ago we built, and I think we might have been the first people to release this commercially, like seamless switchover between peer-to-peer and SFU based calls. Vern can totally correct me if I'm overly optimistic about whether, or like the timing there. But that was really important to us, right? Because we just did not want our customers to have to know the difference unless they kind of got down to a level of like UX design where some component just kind of mattered. For some very very granular kind of UX design, you definitely go deep on some of that kind of stuff. But for 99% of our customers, like they don't care if it's a peer-to-peer call or an SFU call. They care about the stuff that's on this slide. Like how fast can they build something that is useful and interesting and they can iterate on? How good are the calls from a quality and reliability perspective? And did we actually like cover their use case, or are there like big gaps? And so that's how we think about kind of every one of these customer conversations. And to me as an engineer, the single most interesting one right now is latency. Like helping our customers never have to worry about like, oh, I need this different set of tools because I've got this kind of latency trade-off in mind.
Yeah.
So just
I think that's great. And I think there is a lot of that going on now already, handling the peer-to-peer to the SFU type of switch, automatically and making that more seamless. So I think that's a great example. Varun, I'm sorry, I think you were about to.
No, I was going to say that like there's like ideally there would be no flip a switch analogy. It would be like you as the person who built the service would code like a way you want this experience to be for 1-to-1 and 1-to-10 interactive. And if it gets to like creator economy where you have like one person, like, Twitch style, like hundreds of people watching you, thousands of people watching you, and like you get in a guest speaker like in Clubhouse, like you should be able to do that without like thinking about architecture or delivery of audio and video. And it doesn't matter who solves the problem first, like who did P2P for 1-to-1 or SFU is like not the interesting thing. It's like, how do you get people to stop thinking about that from like the developer's perspective so that they can go and build out like these experiences without having to think about. And the good analogy today is for web, right? Like you could have something like Webflow where you don't really care about anything and you like no code, you push a button, it's everywhere in the world. Like people don't complain about latency because they have figured out the CDNs and everything for you. So, and if you would add video to that, like, would that be possible? And would they have to re-architect it? And I'm assuming yes, they would have to re-architect it. So
let me flip that question around on both of you. What are we going to still be talking about in 5 years that you wish we wouldn't have to still talk about?
Packet loss.
Yeah, I thought something maybe around call quality. Yeah.
Latency. I think like we keep solving the problem, but the thing is that we solve the problem, but it's always like confined in a solution space, right? Like we did not think that like we would broadcast something globally in real time that would be available to everyone. And like one example came out like a couple of months ago was like, hey, moon landing was streamed with like sub 3-second latency or like 1-second latency globally, because it was just like, but people don't realize like there was nothing that was competing with it at that point, right? Like everyone's antennas were like we're tuned to just listen to that. There was nothing else. And if we did that, that would be certainly possible today, but you couldn't do that for Super Bowl. Like people keep complaining Super Bowl is still 20 seconds behind. And sometimes the plays are 20 seconds, right? So like, it's like the play's over and you're still seeing the play. So, so that's, I think I would love to like bring that conversation out of scope.
We do talk a lot about sort of what the amazing work that went into building CDNs over the last 30 years to make TCP and HTTP requests work so well globally and so relatively easily. Like you can benefit from these CDN architectures using something like Webflow, as Varun said. You can benefit them from like spinning up your own servers and then putting, Cloudflare in front of your own servers. And they work really, really well. And there's a lot of super interesting engineering work that went into that. And there's going to be continuing like super interesting engineering work because things are going to get incrementally better. But like HTTP delivery is a solved problem on some level. That has not happened for UDP and RTP streams yet that make up the bulk of what we do in the WebRTC world. So we very explicitly talk a lot internally about like building the CDN equivalent for broad set of WebRTC use cases. And a lot of us in this space are working on it, and there's lots of interest in cross-pollination, but we're all trying to push our media servers closer to the edge of the network, trying to make our media servers smarter, trying to make our media servers serve more use cases without a whole lot of customer knowledge being required to sort of tune things at the API or at the protocol level.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I've really appreciated this discussion. Really enjoyed speaking with both of you. And what other topics or anything else you want to make sure that we cover in this before we wrap up?
I think we could talk a little bit about the news that we shared earlier today. Quinn, do you want to do that? It's like we alluded to it a few times, but we didn't actually explicitly say what the news was. So
yeah,
it's true. I mean, we really like the technical conversations and the conversations about the ecosystem. So we never want to like just talk about business stuff. But we did announce a Series B round of funding for Daily. Sort of coincided with announcing that Varun and Sarah Milstein have joined us as executives to help us scale. We're obviously really excited to be able to keep kind of growing our team and pushing our infrastructure out closer to the edge. So I've been on Twitter all morning, which is kind of not my native habitat. And it's really kind of fun to be able to shut Twitter and come back and just talk to you about like the WebRTC stuff that's our bread and butter. But it was a big day for us announcing a new funding round. So thank you.
Oh, well, and congratulations on that. We're definitely happy to speak with you on this big, busy day for you. Congrats on that. Congrats, Varun, on joining. And also exciting news, Sarah Milstein joining. I remember her from her lean startup days. And so very exciting addition to your team there as well. So that's really great. All right. Well, where can they, our viewers go to get a little bit more information about all of this?
Daily.co.
Daily.co.
Daily.co. Nice and easy. All right. Thanks so much, Varun. Thanks so much, Quinn. Really appreciate both of you joining us. Thanks all of you for joining us live today on WebRTC Live. We'll post this video soon to YouTube. It'll also be up on our blog at WebRTC.ventures. You can follow us on Twitter at WebRTC.ventures for more information about upcoming episodes. Our next episode will be on Wednesday, December 15th. Alan Quayle will join us to talk about some of the most recent and coolest TAD hacks from the TAD hacks programs that he organizes. So join us then to hear about some more innovation going on in telecoms and WebRTC. We look forward to having you there. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's make it live.
Thanks for joining us for WebRTC Live. Visit our website at WebRTC.ventures to learn more about our custom design and development services and to learn more about upcoming episodes of WebRTC Live.